I was sitting on the living room couch when Richard walked down the hallway, stopped in front of me, and said, with the same casualness of someone commenting on the weather, "Caroline, I don't love you anymore. Actually, I don't think I ever truly loved you. You are a bland, boring woman, and I deserve someone who makes me feel alive." He was 34, I was 31, and in that moment, as he poured those words over me like throwing cold water on a fire that never existed, I just watched him. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't beg. I think that's what unsettled him the most, because he expected a scene. He expected tears. He expected me to get on my knees and ask him to stay. Instead, I calmly asked, "And who are you with?" He hesitated for a second, perhaps surprised by my coldness, and then blurted out, "With Julianne." Julianne, my best friend since college, the woman who had been my maid of honor, who had dinner at my house every Sunday, who hugged me and told me I was the most special person she knew. Julianne, who apparently thought I was so special that I deserved to share my husband with her. I stood up from the couch, smoothing the skirt of the dress I had bought especially for that night because it was our 7th wedding anniversary, and simply said, "All right, Richard, you can go." He blinked, confused. I think he expected a battle, and I delivered a silent surrender. What he didn't know was that this wasn't a surrender. It was the beginning of a war he didn't even imagine he had already lost. Before I continue my story, I'd like you to tell me where you're listening from and what you would do in my place. Now, continuing. What Richard didn't know, and what Julianne certainly had no idea about, was that I had known everything for exactly 4 months and 16 days. It all started on a Tuesday in March when he left his phone unlocked on the kitchen counter while taking a shower. It wasn't out of suspicion that I looked. I swear it wasn't. He had received a message, and I thought it was something from work, something urgent I could alert him to. But the message was from Jules, and it said, "Can't wait to feel your body again. Yesterday was amazing." I felt my stomach drop, but I didn't let it show. I put the phone back exactly where it was, memorized the position, and when he came out of the shower, I was smiling and asking if he wanted coffee. In the following weeks, I started paying attention. The signs were all there, so obvious that I wondered how I had been so blind. The meetings that ran late into the night, the business trips to the city that happened on the exact same weekend Julianne said she was visiting her mom in Connecticut. The looks they exchanged when they thought I wasn't paying attention. Her perfume in his car. The wedding ring he forgot to wear. I started documenting everything. I created a folder on my work computer, where he would never have access, and started saving screenshots, photos, receipts, everything. I discovered they were meeting at an apartment in Manhattan, always on Wednesdays, when Richard claimed to have a board meeting. I got hold of his corporate credit card statements and discovered he was using money from his family's company to pay for expenses with his mistress. This would be useful later. While Richard and Julianne lived their clandestine romance, thinking I was just the silly, bland wife who noticed nothing, I was silently reorganizing my life. I hired a divorce attorney, Miss Fiona Martins, a woman in her 50s with a fierce reputation and a smile that promised legal destruction for any cheating husband. She guided me to open a separate bank account at a different bank and start gradually transferring my share of the earnings. I worked as a marketing manager at a cosmetics company. I earned well, and I was entitled to half of everything we built during the marriage, including the penthouse on the Upper West Side and the beach house in the Hamptons. I also began documenting my contribution to the family assets, keeping receipts for everything I had paid for, invested in, or organized. Richard always belittled my work, saying it was little side projects, while he, the great businessman, ran the family's construction firm. What he didn't know was that the firm was drowning in debt and that he had forged my signature on a $500,000 loan. I discovered this when a letter from the bank arrived in my name. I guarded that letter as if it were gold. On the night he broke up with me, I had everything ready. I had copies of all important documents in a safe at my lawyer's office. I had changed the beneficiaries of my insurance policies. I had separated my family heirlooms from the jewelry he had given me. I had even consulted a real estate agent to appraise our assets. When Richard packed his bags that night, throwing clothes into a Louis Vuitton bag I had given him for his birthday, he stopped at the door and said, "You'll be fine, Caroline. You've always been strong. Boring, but strong." I smiled and replied, "Good luck, Richard. You're going to need it." He laughed, thinking it was the irony of an abandoned woman. It wasn't. 3 days after the breakup, Richard showed up at the apartment demanding I sign papers for a consensual divorce he had prepared with his lawyer, a college buddy who clearly hadn't read family law statutes since 2005. The deal he proposed was laughable. I would keep my car, my clothes, and alimony of $2,000 a month for 2 years. He would keep everything else, including the apartment, the Hamptons house, the investments, and even the dog, a golden retriever named Benny that he had never walked once. When I refused to sign, he became furious. "You're being difficult, Caroline. Don't complicate things. You have no proof of anything. You have nothing on me. Just sign this and go on with your boring life." I just smiled and said my lawyer would be in touch. The look of surprise on his face when I mentioned I had a lawyer was almost comical. He expected me to just accept it, to go away quietly like the bland woman he thought I was. In the following days, Richard's arrogance reached impressive levels. He posted photos with Julianne on social media, the two of them smiling in expensive restaurants, trips to Miami, boat rides. Julianne, always so concerned with her image as an independent, feminist woman, apparently saw no problem in flaunting a relationship built on betrayal. She even sent me a message saying it wasn't anything personal and that she hoped I found someone who deserved me. I saved that message too. Meanwhile, attorney Fiona was working. She filed for a contested divorce, citing adultery and bad faith, and requested a preventative freeze on the couple's assets. Richard received the notification right in the middle of a romantic dinner with Julianne, according to a mutual friend who was at the same restaurant. Apparently, he turned pale as a sheet and left in a hurry, leaving the bill for Julianne to pay. The freezing of assets was just the beginning. When Richard tried to use the corporate card to pay the rent for the Manhattan apartment, he discovered that I had sent a complete dossier to his father, the true owner of the construction firm, detailing all the embezzlement. Mr. Anthony, my ex-father-in-law, was a man of rigid principles who had built the company from scratch and did not tolerate dishonesty. He called me personally to thank me for the information and to say that he had always considered me a daughter and deeply regretted his son's behavior. A week later, Richard was removed from the company's board for internal investigations. Mrs. Marlene, my ex-mother-in-law, showed up at my apartment with an apple pie and tears in her eyes, apologizing for the son she apparently hadn't raised right. She hugged me and said I would always be welcome in her home, regardless of what happened. These were the first people to switch sides, but they wouldn't be the last. Julianne's family wasn't exactly proud either. Her mother, Mrs. Celia, who had always treated me like a second daughter, cut ties with Julianne when she learned the truth. She called me crying, saying she was ashamed of the daughter she raised. Julianne's brother, who was married to a cousin of mine, was in such an awkward situation that he ended up not speaking to his sister for months. Julianne, who always bragged about her network and influential friends, discovered that no one wants to be associated with a traitor. The mutual friends we had disappeared from her life one by one. In my life, however, people showed up to offer support. Coworkers, neighbors, even the lady at the bakery who had known me for years. Everyone came to tell me they were on my side. I discovered in that moment that being boring wasn't necessarily bad. Boring people are reliable. Boring people are loyal. Boring people don't steal anyone's husband. It was around this time that I reconnected with Luke. Luke Miller was Richard's friend from college, had been a groomsman at our wedding, and was the type of man Richard always called too square and unambitious. Luke was a tax attorney, worked at a respectable firm, and had a modest apartment in Brooklyn that he had bought himself with his own hard work, without help from a rich family. He reached out to me 2 weeks after the breakup to say he was ashamed to have been Richard's friend for so long, and that he was available if I needed any help. It wasn't romantic at first, just a decent man offering support to a woman in a difficult situation. We had coffee a few times, he helped me understand some tax issues related to the divorce, and gradually we got closer. Luke was the opposite of Richard in every way. He was quiet where Richard was loud. He was attentive where Richard was negligent. He was honest where Richard was manipulative. And most importantly, Luke found me interesting, fascinating even. He said he loved how I analyzed situations, how I thought before speaking, how I had a subtle humor he only noticed when he paid attention. For the first time in years, someone made me feel that being boring was actually having class. The first settlement hearing happened in August, 5 months after the breakup. Richard showed up with his incompetent lawyer and a suit I recognized as a birthday gift I had given him years before. He looked confident, almost arrogant, clearly convinced he could intimidate me into accepting an unfavorable deal. Attorney Fiona arrived with 2 binders full of documents and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The judge, Judge Helen Vance, was a 60-year-old woman known for not tolerating games in her courtroom. When Richard's lawyers started arguing that the marriage had ended due to irreconcilable differences and that I wasn't entitled to half the assets because I hadn't contributed equally, Attorney Fiona asked to speak. What followed was a systematic demolition. She presented bank statements showing that I had paid for the apartment renovations, the family trips, the Christmas parties entirely on my own, while Richard siphoned money from the company to support his mistress. She presented screenshots of conversations between Richard and Julianne, planning how to leave me with nothing in the divorce. She presented the document with my forged signature on the $500,000 loan. She presented photos of the Manhattan apartment, paid for with corporate funds. She presented a statement from Mr. Anthony himself, confirming his son's embezzlement. With every document presented, Richard grew paler. His lawyer, clearly unprepared, tried to object without success. The judge looked at Richard with an expression I can only describe as disgust contained by professionalism. The most satisfying moment came when Attorney Fiona presented a recording. It was a conversation between Richard and Julianne recorded in their own apartment via a security camera Julianne had installed for protection, recordings that were automatically saved to a cloud account she had forgotten I had access to, since she had used my email to set it up years prior. In the recording, Richard said, "Caroline is so dumb she won't even notice. We'll keep everything, and she'll accept it quietly because she doesn't have the guts to fight. Boring women are like that. They don't fight back." The judge paused the recording and looked at Richard. "Do you have anything to say, sir?" Richard opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. For the first time since I'd known him, he was speechless. The preliminary ruling was devastating for Richard. The judge determined that I would keep the Upper West Side apartment, the house in the Hamptons, 50% of all investments, and compensatory alimony of $8,000 a month for 5 years, considering I had put career opportunities on hold to support his career during the marriage. Furthermore, she forwarded the documents regarding the forgery of my signature to the district attorney's office, recommending a criminal investigation. Richard stumbled out of the courtroom. Julianne, who had come for moral support, was waiting outside. When he came out, she asked how it went. He walked right past her, got into his car, and drove off alone. I heard later that they had a huge fight that night, with Julianne screaming that he had promised he would be rich and that she hadn't left her life to be with a loser. The irony of being called a loser by the woman who called him a winner while they plotted against me didn't go unnoticed. In the following months, Richard's life collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. The investigation revealed that the embezzlement from the construction firm was much larger than I imagined, and Richard was indicted for embezzlement and forgery. Mr. Anthony, devastated by the shame, permanently removed his son from the company and changed his will, leaving everything to charity. Mrs. Marlene stopped answering her son's calls, saying she needed time to process the disappointment. Richard's friends, the ones who surrounded him at barbecues and trips, vanished when the money ran out. Julianne, realizing the ship was sinking, ended the relationship 3 months after the hearing, claiming she needed to find herself. She tried to go back to her old job, but discovered no one wanted to hire a woman known for destroying marriages. The last I heard of her, she was working as a sales associate at a department store in a small town upstate, living with her grandmother because her mother still hadn't forgiven her. 1 year after the day Richard called me boring, I was standing in front of a mirror adjusting the veil of my wedding dress. Luke was waiting for me in a small chapel in Vermont, surrounded by people who truly loved us. Mrs. Marlene was there, sitting in the front row, crying tears of joy to see me happy. My parents, who had suffered with me through the whole process, were beaming. Even Benny, the golden retriever I had won in the asset division, was there, wearing a bow tie with the mission of ring bearer. When I walked down the aisle and saw Luke looking at me as if I were the most extraordinary thing in the world, I finally understood what it was to be truly loved. It wasn't about grand gestures or public declarations. It was about being seen, being valued, being chosen every day for who you really are. Our honeymoon was in Portugal, a dream I'd had since childhood that Richard had always dismissed as boring. Luke spent 2 weeks showing me every corner of Lisbon, Porto, Sintra, making sure I tried every traditional dish, visited every museum, took photos at every viewpoint. He said he loved seeing my eyes light up when I discovered something new, that my quiet curiosity was one of the things that enchanted him most about me. For the first time, I understood I wasn't boring. I just had a different kind of grace, a grace that superficial people like Richard would never be able to see. 2 years after the divorce, I received a message from Richard. He was asking to talk, saying he had made the biggest mistake of his life, that he never should have let me go, that he thought of me every day. The message was long, full of apologies and empty promises. He said he was living in a rented studio apartment in Jersey City, working as a freelance consultant because no one wanted to hire him with a pending criminal case, and that he had no contact with his family anymore. He said Julianne had been a mistake, an illusion, and that only now did he realize the treasure he had thrown away. I read the entire message, sitting on the living room couch of the apartment that was now solely mine, with Benny sleeping at my feet and Luke making dinner in the kitchen. I thought about replying with something cruel, something that would make him feel a fraction of the pain he caused me. But then Luke appeared in the doorway, asking if I preferred red or white wine, and I realized I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel resentment. I felt nothing for Richard but a vague pity. I deleted the message without replying. Today, 3 years after that night I was called boring, my life is unrecognizable. I was promoted to marketing director at my company, we launched a product line that was a national success, and my name appeared on a list of the most influential executives in the industry. Luke and I bought a house in a gated community in Westchester with a huge backyard where Benny can run freely. We are trying for our first child, and every night before sleep, Luke tells me I am the most interesting woman he knows. On the wall of my home office, I have a framed photo. It's a picture of me from the day of the final divorce decree, walking out of the courthouse with attorney Fiona, both of us smiling. Below the photo, I pasted the message Richard sent me that night of the breakup, the one where he called me boring. It is my daily reminder that the people who try to diminish us are usually the ones who are afraid of our shine. Richard called me boring because it was easier than admitting he was the one incapable of seeing color. Julianne betrayed me because it was easier than building something of her own. And me, I simply continued being who I always was. Calm, observant, strategic, loyal. Boring? Maybe. But happy, fulfilled, and loved. And that, in the end, is the only revenge that matters.